Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today we're talking about leaders are not victims and what that means for you. So without further ado, let's hop right in. Hey leaders, I'm your coach Adam, here to have an honest talk about leadership, the obstacles you might face, and how to refine your leadership skills to help you become the leader I know you are. So let's grab a drink, sit back, relax, and have a chat. We've all been victims. At some point in your life, you've been a victim of something. Maybe it's bullying. Maybe it's harassment. Maybe you were assaulted. Maybe you were a victim of fraud. Or victims of your own poor decision making. It doesn't really matter. The truth of the matter is that we've all been a victim. Somewhere in your life, that's just a fact. What I find interesting when I talk with leaders, especially leaders that are in an executive CEO position, none of them are victims. They used to be a victim, but they're not victims now. And they certainly don't think of themselves as victims, even if something bad was to happen to them. They simply aren't victims. And I found that very interesting. Even more so, I found it interesting when I was chit-chatting with a woman over a few drinks. And she was a young entrepreneur who started advertising on a social media platform with outfits. She would get brand deals and expand her social media influence. And in talking with her, she was quite an accomplished entrepreneur. She had local media talking with her. She had climbed the ranks of her managerial organization. In all honesty, she was someone to be envious of. But when I talked with her, something very interesting happened. She kept talking about herself as if she was a victim. And it was bizarre. She would sit across the table from me and say, as a woman with mental illness, as a woman with this, nobody expected this from a woman. And it kept resonating throughout the entire conversation. It was this tiny little undercurrent that I kept hearing. And I pointed it out, but I did a little bit more of a roundabout way, and I simply said to her, hey, can I ask you a question? And you can throw this in my face if you want, and we can just kind of move past it. But I'd like to ask you a question. And she said, sure. I said, what if you weren't a woman with mental illness? What if you weren't a woman that the world was trying to put down, but just a person who's an accomplished entrepreneur? Somebody that's strong, somebody that is independent, and somebody who is making their dreams come true. And she really stopped and thought about it. And she said, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. And we just kind of sat in silence for a few minutes. And it really reminded me of my conversations with CEOs, with executives, with higher echelon leadership. None of them talk like that. They don't blame their faults. They don't blame society. They don't blame anyone. They don't see themselves as a victim of anything. They see themselves as an individual that is carving their own future, that has the reins of their life within their hands, and they have control over it. And that's not to say that they are blind to the social, economical issues that they face or their own limitations. In fact, they see those and they factor them in to their next decision, their next plan, their next course of action. And I found that truly interesting. And when I was thinking about a podcast and what we should talk about today, this kept coming up time and time again around leaders are not victims. They don't see themselves that way, and their people don't see themselves that way. And it's fascinating to watch. But let's talk a little bit about victims. I worked with many of them in the housing first sector. In fact, all my patients came to me and they were always the victim of life, of circumstances. Half of my job was to pull them out of that mindset and get them into a mindset of, I am the master of my own destiny. I can live my life however I want, and I can dream big and travel the roads to accomplish those dreams. But what I found when they first came to me, they always came to me with a victim mindset. As the victim, they're looking to be saved. They're not interested in solving their own problems. As the victim, they want somebody else to solve their problems for them. They want to shed the responsibilities of making the right or wrong choice, and they want to offload it onto somebody else. As the victim, they don't want to be in charge of their life in this really weird way. But it's because they don't want to be in charge of their own life that they actually can't move forward. They either refuse to or they don't want to. They could move forward if they actually put their minds to it. They just choose not to. They stay grounded in the present. And in fact, most victims see themselves in the past. They're always talking about what happened to them in the past, what happened to their ancestors in the past. And that's the reason why they can't move forward, because something happened in their past that has kept them rooted, which leads us into this negative mindset that victims all have. When I talk to somebody that's so firmly rooted in this victimized mindset, they complain about how the systems are unfair, how nothing they do will work out, how they've tried everything and they're just a failure. They just see all the negatives in the world and within their own lives. They don't see any of the positives. They could have 10 amazing things happen within their life and one bad or awful thing happen. And they will focus on that one bad thing as if it was the only thing, because it validates their victim mindset. And because they have this negative view in the world, because they're so firmly rooted in the past, because they can't move forward, they actually don't have any resources. Well, they do, but they don't think that they do, and are unable or reluctant to utilize them for whatever reason to help them move forward. And because of these negativity and all this stuff, nobody really respects victims. They don't have any of that personal respect that we had talked about a few podcasts ago. Because why would you respect them? They're a victim. They need to be helped out. They're not somebody to be admired. They're somebody to be pitied in a weird way. And that's not what leaders are. Leaders are individuals that are positive. They're uplifting to their people. They cheer them on when they do well, and they help them out when they're doing bad. They have resources at their disposal to push their team to the direction they need to go. They have huge amounts of personal respect from their people. The leader could be going to hell, and their followers will march right beside them into the depths. And that's because leaders are always moving forward, and they live in what's possible, and they live for dreams, hopes, and aspirations. And it's a flip. Victims have nothing. They live in the past. They don't move forward. Nobody really respects them. Leaders, on the other hand, are the complete opposite. They have resources. They're positive. They live in what's possible. They are respected. And they're always moving forward. And when you think about the two, they're on polar opposites. So, of course, leaders can't be victims. It just doesn't make any sense. You could be a manager and be a victim, but if you're a leader, you just can't be. Because if you've done the work to become a leader, you have a completely different mindset. There was a woman that I had the privilege to work with, and her name was Linda. She was actually my boss. And what was interesting about Linda was a victim. She wasn't a leader. She was a victim. But she was in a management role, which meant that she should have been a leader, but as we discussed ages ago, leaders and management are separate. Managers are all about utilizing all the resources of a company and or position to accomplish a goal. Leaders don't do that. Leaders focus on helping their people and moving their people forward. That's the only two things a leader has to do. Or, as I like to say, take care of your people and make decisions. But Linda wasn't a leader in any form. And Linda was a victim. She would often complain about her life and how awful it is. And I remember one day I was sitting in the break room and Linda decided to sit with me and start chit-chatting with me. She started disclosing about how awful her life is. And this is a rigmarole that most of us were quite used to. And she was venting about her financial troubles. She was venting about how she works too hard. She was venting about relationship issues. And there were other people within this room. The thing that Linda didn't understand was the people around her were beneath her. We didn't make as much money as Linda. Linda actually made $20,000 more than I did. Linda had a husband, dual incomes. Linda had 2 homes, one of which she rented out. Linda traveled every year. She traveled to exotic destinations to the Caribbean. She traveled to Jordan. She traveled to Brazil. And she would always take fabulous photos of it. Linda dressed to the nines. And yet, she would come into the staff room and vent to me about her problems. What? Linda had huge power over me. Linda had status over me. Linda had everything over me. And yet she was the victim. And what really irked me and annoyed me was Linda was an avid feminist. But she would talk about how the patriarchy was putting her down and that she needed to rise up and make more money and show the world that women can do amazing things, which is fair. You know, don't get me wrong. Feminism is fabulous. I'm all about equality. What Linda failed to understand was she was the boss of this entire facility. She was the manager. She had male employees beneath her that were making significantly less money than her. And when they hear how she's being put down, how she's being stomped on, how she can't make ends meet, how she's struggling. They were sitting there going, what the hell? Do you know I work 2 jobs every single day, 7 days a week, just to make ends meet? I have to rent an apartment. I can't afford a car. And yet here you are with everything. What? And what happened was she lost all personal respect from those around her because she was the victim. She was always the victim. And nobody talked to her. We all listened and we kindly nodded when she griped about her life. But nobody listened to her. And when she left, nobody cared. Leaders cannot be victims. And if you are a victim, you're not a leader, and you certainly don't have the respect of your colleagues. So, how do we tell if we are a victim? It's kind of easy, actually. Like Linda doesn't take accountability. She didn't take accountability for how she made her fellow colleagues feel. She didn't take accountability for the decisions that she made. She just didn't take any accountability. It was always somebody else's fault. It's never her own. And they always live in the past. They always view what happened to them in the past, what happened to society in the past, as keeping them down now. It keeps them from moving forward. And they always focus on the problems. Many victims catastrophize their own problems. They blow it out of proportion. They make mountains out of molehills all the time, which is upsetting to watch and just see happen. Problems that aren't necessarily problems and more minor obstacles become unstoppable mountains that will grind a team to a halt, paralyzing them within their tracks. And it's not the fault of the team. You can have a stellar team. The problem is with their leader of their team or their manager. They're a victim. And victims don't move forward. Victims stand in place. Victims refuse to make decisions. They want to be rescued. They want somebody else to take responsibility, which can grind even the best of teams to a complete standstill. And left unchecked, ultimately, the team will get gutted because all of your talent will just move on. Why work with an incompetent leader when you can find another? That's one of the main benefits of being an employee. So, we talked a lot about victims. But how do we move ourselves away from that victim mentality? How do we move ourselves to becoming leaders that people want to follow, that people respect and admire? The first thing is to accept the past for what it is, the past. The past has a lot of lessons to be learned if you would like to go diving into it. But the reality is that the past is not the present, and there are differences between then and now. We can chart our own future. Always remember, the past is set in stone, but the future has infinite possibilities. Move on. Move forward. Accept the responsibilities of your station. If you mess up, if you screw up and it's your fault, accept responsibility. Accept it, learn from it, implement the new learnings, and move forward. Don't stew on them. Don't try to push your mess-ups onto somebody else. Take responsibility for your own actions. And don't vent to your team. If you are struggling, if you are having it bad, you need to vent either laterally to other people of your station or vertically up. Do not vent down. If you are venting down, or you feel like you need to say something about what's going on in your life, the question you must always ask yourself is, why am I saying this? Who does it benefit? Does it benefit the team, or does it benefit me? And if it doesn't benefit the team, if it doesn't benefit your people, don't say it. Move on to something else. But when we vent laterally or up. Or, hell, go find a third party, a coach, a therapist, a friend. Vent to them, but do not vent to your team. And then a few questions to ask yourself is always, if this is what my life is like now, if this is what is happening in my team now, what do I want it to be instead? What kind of future do you want for yourself and for your team? And what do you need to succeed in that? Look at knowledge. Do you need to further your education? Do you need to find a mentor? Do you have proper supports in your life? Expand your resources, because leaders have resources. Victims do not. And lastly, to start putting you into a much more positive mindset, ask yourself, what was one good thing that happened in my day? Only one. Focus on that. Stay away from the negativity. Maybe get a journal and start writing in it about the amazing things that happened in your day. The one good thing that happened in your day. Start training your mind to see the goodness in life as opposed to the negative. And if you can do that, you'll be well on your way to becoming the leader that I know that you are. So to wrap up a little bit about what we talked about, leaders and victims are on polar opposites of the scale. Management can be victims. There's a lot of managers out there that are victims, but leaders are not. Victims need to be rescued. They have a negative mindset. They lack resources. They have no personal respect from their peers. They live in the past and they refuse to move forward. Leaders, on the other hand, have resources. They're positive. They live in what's possible. They have respect, and they're always moving forward. If you find yourself never taking accountability, always saying it's somebody else's fault, living in the past, and focusing on problems, not solutions, it's time to change that mindset. And some easy ways to start is to accept responsibility, to accept that life is what it is now, and ask yourself that if you don't like it, what would you like instead? What would you need to succeed to make your life what you wanted? What knowledge would you need? Would you need help from a friend? Would you need a new skill? What do you need? And when it comes to venting, we always vent laterally or up, or to a third party. Don't vent to your team. And so with that, we'll come to an end of tonight's podcast. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, give it a like, and share it with a friend. And if you're ready to take the next leap and improve your leadership skills, head over to www.seedingthelead.com and book your free coaching session today.